Welcome to Crossroads. Nationwide protests are now being planned. Not just Los Angeles, but the riots in Los Angeles, they're also continuing. Now, look, already additional demonstrations have sprung up in San Francisco and New York City, even Dallas now, actually. But the large-scale protests for June 14th, this weekend, those would be the big ones. They're planning 50 states and, multiple protests per state. The movement is being called No Kings. And it's going to be falling on the same day as President Donald Trump's birthday, which is also the 250th anniversary celebration of the U.S. Army. They're going to do the military parade in Washington, D.C. for that. Now, on this point of the protest, so they're being called the No Kings protests, and they're being done through what organizers call the 50-51 movement. Maybe 51-50 for many of them, but the 50-51 movement. Now, the organizers already have a map online. It shows hundreds of protest locations. There's a lot of them in California. So those are going to expand. If you zoom in on the map in California, on their official site, it shows they're planning over 24 protests just in Los Angeles. That's going to be this Saturday, and that's, again, nationwide, not just LA. Now, my personal take, the current protests we're watching in LA, if they do not stop before this Saturday, and I don't think they will, because my assumption is they want to have these merge into each other. If these do not stop, they're going to be pulled into a broader social movement that's going to be all across the United States. And there are groups planning it. They're not hiding it even. It does seem that many of the same far-left organizations, they're involved in both. So the same organizations pulling the strings on like the actual organizing level, not like the grassroots level, but the actual organizing level, it's the same groups. And it's the same groups between these, the same groups with the LA ones, and the same groups with a lot of other riots and protests we've been watching around the United States. Going back to the Obama administration, more than 10 years now. With the upcoming nationwide protests, they made many of the organizations public. If you look at their site, they have listed 190 organizations. And these are everything from, pseudo-normal ones like the ACLU. You have other ones that are more on the radical side, like Rise and Resist, Third Act, Resist Trump, many others. Some of these are specifically about Trump. Some are like environmental programs. Others are actual just kind of like far-left communist socialist type groups. So it's a big mix of them. The organizers, they've also announced training programs. They're doing trainings for this. They're not hiding it. If you go to their site, they say this. This is just one of them. It says, quote, "This training will prepare you to show up safely and confidently at this nonviolent action. Whether you're marching, rallying, or supporting from the sidelines, you'll learn how to protect yourself, your community, and stand up for your rights." That's one of the normal like ACLU trainings they're having. Another one is called the Marshals Training. This one's a bit different. They have a lot of these trainings posted. This one states it's required training for the all No Kings host. So if you want to be a host of one of the protests, you have to do their marshal training. And it says it will be a space where we will fill you in on our latest alignment going into No Kings weekend and ensure you have up-to-date guidance to prepare you for No Kings Day. It adds, quote, "We'll equip you with essential skills for a smooth and secure mobilization, covering practical tips on crowd management, incident response, and key safety protocols." In other words, these are the organizers, the mobilizers, and that's a different organization. This is not an ACLU training. This is a mobilize.us training. In terms of the name, No Kings, I'm not clear exactly where that statement comes from. There's a video game reference I might have pulled from, which is No Kings, No Gods. And again, more like an anarchistic type approach. It's not clear if that's what they're saying. A lot of them claim that we're living under an oligarchy, and they say that Trump has, basically gone beyond the powers of a president. This is more directly against Donald Trump. But again, the organizations involved with this, grassroots movement representing basically the entire ground level organizations of the Democrat Party. Normal ones like the ACLU, but also these socialist and communist ones that would be part of like the very far left sections of it. Now, we'll see whether the upcoming planned protests, whether they look anything like the current riots in Los Angeles. One issue they're going to have is if the LA riots continue, and they are riots right now. Like if you're burning cars and throwing rocks at police cars and throwing rocks at police's heads over, freeway overpasses, it's a riot, or burning cars down. You could say not everybody is rioting, but they're riots. If the current incidents, the current riots last until Saturday, what that's going to mean is that many of the same people involved, the same organizations, same individuals, same kind of movement, they're going to get merged into these ones. And if that happens, you're going to watch these riots very quickly probably turn violent, because all you need for a riot to start usually is just a couple people who instigate the crowd and then start something bigger. Will this be seen as, them organizing riots then, not just protests? I would imagine from the Trump side and the public statements you're going to watch, that will probably be the narrative. But we will see. It'll also be framed as, mostly peaceful. Based on public statements from the organization and this whole thing happening, it does seem to be the case they are discouraging violence. They are discouraging it. They're training to discourage it. But aside from that, there's also the anti-ICE and anti-deportation protests, which again, if those are spreading, those are right now turning violent, those will get swept up into it, and you will probably watch this nationwide protest take on that color, take on that character. Already as we're watching, with the current anti-ICE protests, they're also going national right now. There are similar demonstrations starting up in San Francisco. Police there, they've already started arresting some people for assault and vandalism. San Francisco Police Department had an official announcement. Here's what they said. They said individuals in the group became violent and began to commit crimes ranging from assault to felony vandalism and causing property damage. It says the SFPD, San Francisco Police Department, declared an unlawful assembly. While many left the scene, several individuals remained and continued engaging in illegal activity. It says 2 officers suffered non-life-threatening injuries, and one was transported to a local hospital for further medical assistance. It says the remaining group continued towards Market and Kearny Streets, where individuals vandalized buildings and an SFPD patrol vehicle, while others splintered off and continued to vandalize property. Further, it states that officers developed and coordinated a strategic plan to detain multiple individuals who refused to comply. It says approximately 60 people were arrested, including juveniles, which means they're probably going to get let off the hook pretty quickly. But it says officers also recovered 1 firearm at the scene. Now with this, this also ties into the narrative you've been seeing of the mostly peaceful protests and how dare they go after these people who are just peacefully protesting. The context you're seeing there is very similar, in LA, is very similar to what you saw in San Francisco. Basically, if the police are going to disrupt the protests, they first need to basically turn violent. They're looting, they're burning cars, they're vandalizing. From there, they make a dispersal order. Once they give the dispersal order, it's actually kind of given a warning shot. They're saying, okay, you're of course turning into a riot. If you do not leave, you will be arrested. At that point, people have a choice to leave. So if you're a peaceful protester, you leave the area. Then what happens is the violent protesters remain, or the ones who don't want to listen to police. They then actually let them continue doing this stuff for a little bit. In San Francisco, again, even after the dispersal order, which only happened after vandalism and stuff was taking place, dispersal order, they're lighting cars on fire, they're vandalizing buildings, they're assaulting police, then they do the arrests. And so you have to surpass like 2 different lines. You have to cross 2 different lines before you're arrested. Which again, for the public narratives, if you look at the actual reports of the police, they get several warnings and several chances before they actually do arrest them. And so they're not harassing or arresting like random people unless you violate the dispersal orders. On that point, last night in Los Angeles, you actually did have some larger groups arrested. And there were some journalists too. They were even arresting some journalists. The context of that is that if they were with the main protest group, it meant that already they were violating the dispersal orders, meaning they were in knowing violation of the orders to disperse. As a journalist, I can tell you that I wanted to go there and cover things. They put up checkpoints. It's hard to get past it. Again, we'll see what happens tonight, but that's basically the way it's been working. If you go past that, they will actually let you, but it's of your own volition, meaning you go there being told with an understanding that if they arrest the crowd, you will be arrested with them. And so there's several warnings, several parts of it, and that's the context of it. Now, on this point, it's not clear what group the individuals are part of in San Francisco. Andy No, senior editor at the Post-Millennial, he's actually suggesting that this may have been an Antifa protest, that Antifa is now getting involved. This is anti-fascist action, which many people have said has the tactics and ideologies of actual fascists. But Antifa has gotten involved with this. Now, Andy No, he's been one of the main reporters covering that group over the years. Again, they get engaged in violence against, political enemies, and fortunately kind of become the bread and butter of that, this protest movement. Now, they actually they posted an announcement allegedly from that group, and Andy No wrote on X, Antifa International has announced a June 8th direct action to attack the ICE Gov facility in San Francisco. That would have been the night when they were arrested. He said the planned riot is organized in support of the insurrection in Los Angeles. Now, in response to that, Representative Anna Paulina Luna, a Republican from Florida, she announced that she's going to file legislation that will designate Antifa a terrorist organization. And she wrote this. She said, peaceful protest is one thing. Masked individuals and coordinated terror campaigns are un-American. Now, on that point, Trump has been calling for the masked individuals to be released. Anybody who's familiar with laws, including the former LA riots, knows if you wear a mask during a riot, it's actually an additional charge under most cases. The problem we have in the U.S. is because of mask mandates that required you to wear face masks. Masks during riots have become normal. Of course, the context of the George Floyd riots and the 2020 riots, a lot of that happened, ironically, when all of us were told to lock down in our homes because of COVID-19. What an interesting narrative, right? Lock down in your homes or you'll die of COVID, but if you want to politically protest, you can go out. That means either they didn't believe that that means they either did not believe lockdowns were necessary to protect you, or it means that they were willing to let people die of COVID if they wanted to go out. So it was one of those two narratives. I don't know which one. But what that meant was, of course, during COVID-19, people protesting on the street, there were face mask mandates. And so, of course, people wore masks. Masks became normalized during protests in the United States. That was not the case before. And the law actually still does stand. It's just not being enforced. They are saying now they want to have masked protesters arrested. Trump has been calling for it quite a bit. Now, on this point, a group of protesters was also just arrested in New York City. So these are spreading. There were no reports of the ones in New York turning violent. They just did a sit-in. Police, they arrested 98 people. They were staging a sit-in specifically to try to take over Trump Tower. And again, dispersal orders, they don't listen. They arrest them. In New York City, it's going to be a slap on the wrist charge. It's for the cameras, basically. It's sending a message. Last night, there were also ones in Dallas, and the protesters were also throwing fireworks at police. Something we've been seeing develop in LA as well. So Dallas, LA, those are the ones that people are throwing fireworks. Fireworks are an interesting tool to the protesters because normally if you throw explosive devices, incendiary devices, that's a pretty serious charge. You can give a charge of terrorism for that. If you throw fireworks, it's like a fireworks violation. There's different laws with it, unless it involves also assaulting police. But let's be honest with ourselves, Los Angeles, other places, they don't enforce the law like that. So as we've seen in past riots, oftentimes the protesters get let off the hook. We'll see how it happens this time. Maybe it will be different. But given the way that prosecutions have happened in the past, the prosecutors tend to let him off the hook. We will see what happens this time. Now, as for Los Angeles, the protests and the riots, they're ongoing. And I'm being fair, right? There are riots taking place. Those are also happening alongside, relatively peaceful protests. There are a lot of people who are just like Mexican nationals, or people don't want to see their mothers-in-laws deported, those types. But you also have like masked individuals, actual activist groups, and far-left organizations that are actively coordinating, rioting, burning stuff down. And so you do have a couple different like groups. Now, let me show you what's been happening with that. This is some of the latest that's been happening in Los Angeles. The big thing that just happened, the military has come in. This is going to get interesting. The U.S. Marine Corps has now officially deployed to Los Angeles. They've also now bolstered the number of National Guard's troops. So you do now have a military presence. Epoch Times also noted yesterday that David Huerta, the president of the Service Employees International Union, SEIU of California, was on June 9th slapped with felony charges relating to his conduct during an ICE deportation operation, an ICE operation in Los Angeles on June 6th. It notes this: Huerta has been charged with one count of conspiracy to impede an officer under 18 U.S.C. 372, which carries a maximum penalty of 6 years in prison. Interesting, right? Maybe they'll get him also with disruption of an official proceeding if they move to get him, right? But it notes here, Huerta allegedly sat cross-legged in front of a gate to prevent federal agents from transporting illegal immigrant detainees and encouraged others to do the same. It notes the criminal complaint suggests that he was spreading and or receiving information about the real-time location of agents in order to protest. Now, on that point, there were individuals who were getting real-time data on the location of the ICE agents, again, Immigration Customs Enforcement, as they were carrying out raids to deport people. You then had people from that feeding information to the activists and the protesters. They were going to locations and then blocking ICE from carrying out deportations. And that was the thing that kind of led into the snowball effect of what we're seeing now with the protests and riots. It notes here that California Attorney General Rob Bonta said that Trump unlawfully deployed the National Guard to Los Angeles in response to the riots over ICE operations. This is going to be important because if the California AG is opposed to Trump and doesn't like what Trump is doing, you could see the Attorney General have an impact on the way the criminal cases are handled. And so back to my original point, look, it's Los Angeles still. It's a Los Angeles, again, legal system. And if they are opposed to Donald Trump and they support the protesters and rioters, they're going to be judging the law and the cases in line with that as well. So you're going to watch a lot. My personal take, you're going to watch a lot of slap on the wrist charges. Further in it says this, though. President Donald Trump on Monday stood by his decision to send the National Guard to Los Angeles to quell the riots. So Trump is pushing back against, again, California Governor Gavin Newsom, who has actually called on the National Guard to be pulled back. I'll get into that more in a bit. Trump has now expanded the presence of the National Guard. As I predicted yesterday, Trump is doubling down rather than backing off. And this is actually expanding now. Further in it also says this: White House border czar Tom Homan on Monday clarified his previous remarks, saying that public officials who do not enforce the law could be held accountable. And he said this, quote, "Here's what I said. They have a right to protest. They have the First Amendment rights, but they can't cross that line. They can't cross the line of impediment," he told MSNBC. Now, on this point, remember that Tom Homan, the border czar, he was suggesting that even Governor Gavin Newsom should be arrested. California Governor Gavin Newsom pushed back very strongly on that. I will get into that more in a bit. But Tom Homan here is suggesting that there's a line. If you cross the line of blocking police, if you cross the line of blocking officers from going into the buildings and carrying out arrests, you will be arrested too. And he said this directly. He said, quote, "They can't cross that line of putting their hands on officers. They can't cross the line of knowing and concealing an illegal alien." And he said, "These are all federal crimes. then they're in statute, meaning this is official law, and he said they will be prosecuted. Now, the irony with that is they're going to be prosecuted within the local legal system, and the local legal system does not seem to support the federal government right now. But we'll see how they deal with that. In addition to this, though, it also seems the sanctuary city policies, they are spreading. California is a sanctuary state. That's going to be challenged. It's probably going to go to the Supreme Court eventually, but it's spreading now even in California. Glendale, that's a major suburb of Los Angeles. They used to kind of go against some of those policies. They've now changed it. They announced they're ending their contract with ICE. This is the official website, Glendale, California, and they say this: the city of Glendale has made the decision to formally terminate its agreement with U.S. Homeland Security and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to house federal immigration detainees at the Glendale Police Department facility. Further, when they state that nevertheless, despite the transparency and safeguards the city has upheld, the city recognizes that public perception of the ICE contract, no matter how limited or carefully managed, no matter the good, has become divisive, meaning too many people are against it, basically, and so they're canceling the contract. And they say, and while opinions on this issue may vary, the decision to terminate this contract is not politically driven. They say it is rooted in what this city stands for: public safety, local accountability, and trust. Now, look, that is politics. They say it's not politically driven, but it's a political issue, no matter how they frame it. But on that point, too, I think they're saying that they're not like opposed to the Trump administration, but they're answering to what the local people are protesting for, basically. That's the way I read this. Further, when they state, to that end, we emphasize the Glendale Police Department does not enforce immigration law, and they say that is not their role, nor will it ever be. That's becoming a common statement we're seeing almost across the board, by the way. You're seeing people who are opposed to ICE saying this is not my job, nor will it ever be. And that's kind of almost word for word the slogan now you're seeing of people who are trying to resist the deportations when it comes to their jobs. When you're in a police role or a DA role or whatever else, that's like the new slogan they have for it. But they say this: we remain in full compliance with California Senate Bill 54, which prohibits law enforcement from using resources for immigration enforcement, again, sanctuary city laws. And they say the Glendale Police Department is not engaged in immigration enforcement, nor will it do so moving forward. Again, the slogan that's going around: it's not our job and we're not going to do it. Now, there's a similar dispute actually taking place in Florida, almost the same slogan, in fact. The Broward County Sheriff, that's Gregory Toney, he declared that his department is not going to support ICE operations in the state of Florida. And he's now facing pushback in the state of Florida. The Attorney General there, that's James Uthmeyer, he has now responded to the sheriff. He said in a public statement that state law in Florida requires the sheriff's department to support ICE. So in other words, this is like reverse law of sanctuary city laws. This is going to get interesting, and here's why. Now look, sanctuary city laws, if you pass it through the state Senate, that's in opposition to federal law. And it's basically saying that they will forbid local law enforcement from cooperating with ICE. The problem you have there is your sheriff. The sheriffs are elected officials. And technically, there's again, the Supreme Court's going to have to decide this. But what that means, the sheriffs are elected officials. They go by the Constitution. They can interpret that as they will. And so normally, even if you have a law, even if you have a state law, the sheriff can choose, depending on their interpretation of the law, the Constitution in this case. They can choose whether they enforce it or not. In California, that's made it so the sheriffs cannot enforce immigration custom enforcement laws, again, sanctuary city policies. The opposite is taking place in Florida, where you have the sheriff doing what the sheriffs in other parts of the country could arguably do, saying, where they're saying, I'm not going to enforce, or, I have to go by the government, the local government, and I'm not allowed to enforce this. In Florida, you have the opposite, and the sheriff is saying that they are going to go against the state law by enacting their own form of sanctuary laws. This is going to be interesting because, again, this is going to have to go to the Supreme Court. Do the sheriffs have the ability to go against the federal government? Many would argue they do. But does the sheriff have the ability to go against the state government? That's going to be a big question. And even with the federal government argument, there's also a question of whether states have to enforce federal government law, because that's when the federal government is actually legally able to deploy National Guard, for example, and bypass the local government, which is, again, on a more meta level, the argument you have in California, where Gavin Newsom is trying to sue the Trump administration for bypassing them to deploy the National Guard. Again, kind of an intertwining web of legal arguments that goes down to the fundamental idea of, can you choose to not enforce federal law, right? That's kind of the nuts and the bolts of it all. But back to what's happening in Florida. The Attorney General is asking for clarifications on statements from the local sheriff. Official announcement, public letter. The sheriff stated specifically the department has other priorities and that, quote, immigration is not one of them. Again, I mentioned this is kind of the slogan you're seeing going around when it comes to government. Government officials who oppose the federal government. They're saying that we have a job. Immigration customs enforcement is not one of our jobs. The federal government argues otherwise. In Florida, the Florida government is also arguing otherwise. In response to that statement, the Attorney General in Florida said, quote, I would hope your statements were mere political posturing, but if not, your expressed positions would constitute a failure of your statutory obligation to utilize, quote, best efforts to support the enforcement of federal immigration law. And they note that is required under Florida law. And if the sheriff is not enforcing Florida state law, is that legal? Some would argue it is. Others would argue it is not. Again, on that point, we will probably see this go to the Supreme Court eventually. But also on that point, there's a growing conflict between President Donald Trump and California Governor Gavin Newsom over the handling of the riots. I'll be talking more about this after a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. There's a growing conflict between President Donald Trump and California Governor Gavin Newsom over the handling of the Los Angeles riots. This is going to be important because whatever the legal determination is from this whole battle they're having, this is going to determine, very likely, the laws and the interpretation of the laws for every state across the entire United States. Now, what's happening with this? Donald Trump is suggesting that Gavin Newsom could be obstructing justice. Gavin Newsom, he is suggesting that Trump is violating the law and deploying the National Guard and bypassing state laws. And yesterday, Governor Gavin Newsom made an official announcement. They will be filing a lawsuit against Donald Trump. This is what he officially said. Quote, he said, we are suing Donald Trump. He said this is a manufactured crisis. He created fear and terror to take over a state militia and violate the U.S. Constitution. The illegal order he signed could allow him to send the military into any state he wishes. Again, the important part here, this legal battle will determine the entire national debate on a legal ground. And he adds this quote, every governor, red or blue, should reject this outrageous overreach. There's also a lot of hyperbole out there. He said, this isn't that. And Gavin Newsom said, quote, this is an unmistakable step towards authoritarianism that threatens the foundation of our republic. And he said, we cannot let it stand. Now, on that point, others have pointed out, well, weren't governments deploying the National Guard for like COVID and COVID policies? Was that? The other argument for that is it's state versus federal. And so, you could argue that deploying the military, because this is the other big argument. The military is for war fighting. You're deploying the military, a war fighting force, to go against the citizens of the United States. It's political posturing. They used National Guard during COVID. Was that deploying the military, a war fighting force against the American people? No. Again, it's when they need additional help. They can do it when they need additional help with law enforcement. And in Los Angeles, where they were not diverting LAPD forces to help with the riots, when the LAPD was being surrounded, attacked, and so on, the argument was they needed to have more help. Trump said, you're not doing it, I'm going to do it. And that was the argument. Now, on Trump's point, Trump was also questioned by reporters about the recent comments from border czar Tom Homan, the one where he said, if you obstruct, we're going to arrest you. And they asked if Donald Trump would support Tom Homan in arresting Gavin Newsom over obstruction. The argument being that Gavin Newsom, this is the Republican argument, they're saying that he's not properly enforcing the laws, that he's allowing police to be attacked and not supporting them properly, that he's even allowing, again, people to obstruct the arrest, the deportation efforts of illegal immigrants. And by preventing proper law enforcement, by preventing the forces they need, that by extension of that, he's allowing the obstruction of federal agents who are, of course, trying to carry out deportations, which have snowballed into the current riots. Who do you blame? Do you blame Gavin Newsom for, again, not protecting ICE agents and not arresting, for example, protesters? Because, again, it's sanctuary city laws, right? That's the argument. Can you have local police go and arrest ICE, anti-ICE protesters? Well, that would go against the sanctuary city laws, so they can't do anything. What happens if ICE arrests them and it turns into protests against ICE, and then ICE agents get attacked by the protesters? Can the police defend them? Or is it a violation of sanctuary city laws? This is the argument, right? And so who do you blame? Do you blame the local government for allowing that to happen? Or do you blame the federal government for trying to deport people in the first place? If you boil down all the arguments, that's what the actual argument is. That fundamentally is what the argument is. And so, who's at fault here, right? Now, on this point, Donald Trump is actually agreeing with Tom Homan. And he was saying that if he was Tom Homan, that he may do this. Watch.
Tom Homan to come and arrest him. Should he do it? I would do it if I was Tom.
Now, I know the audio with there was a bit rough, but basically here's what happened. Donald Trump was asked, Tom Homan suggested that, maybe they'd even arrest Gavin Newsom for obstruction. They're saying, would you do it? Do you agree? Donald Trump said, again, it's a setup question, obviously. They wanted the soundbite, but Donald Trump basically says he would do it if he was Tom Homan. Now, again, Gavin Newsom responded to that, and he wrote on X, quote, the President of the United States just called for the arrest of a sitting governor. And Gavin Newsom said, this is a day I hoped I would never see in America. He said, I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. This is a line we cannot cross as a nation. This is an unmistakable step towards authoritarianism. Now, look, personally, I don't think it's accurate to say Donald Trump was calling for Gavin Newsom's arrest. Again, it was kind of a setup question by the media. They asked him, do you agree with Tom Homan in this? And Trump is going to say, yes, I do, or no, I don't. Trump basically said that if he was Tom Homan, he would do it. He did not call for it. He's just saying, yeah, I agree with Tom Homan, basically. Take that as you will. The other issue is that Trump is, in fact, the president of the United States. And there is a chance that if he agrees with Tom Homan, that, they may take that as a call saying, okay, we got the green light, go do it. So you can interpret it both ways to an extent. On that point, though, it also doesn't seem that either side is backing down. You're not watching either side fold on this. Any side, for that matter. You're not even watching the protesters fold. They're all holding up. Gavin Newsom, he gave an official order to repeal the deployment of the National Guard. So he's saying, pull the National Guard out. In a statement on Truth Social, Trump said in response, quote, "We made a great decision in sending the National Guard to deal with the violent, instigated riots in California." And Trump said, if we had not done so, Los Angeles would have been completely obliterated. And again, Trump has since then expanded the operations. He has actually deployed additional National Guard. He has also now officially deployed the U.S. Marines. Now, on that point also, you could also say politically, when it comes to the upcoming June 14th protests, again, it's basically 190 organizations, most of the Democrat Party's grassroots. The other argument you're going to see come up is that also instigating a riot, or is that aiding or abetting a riot? Because if you have ongoing riots and protests, and then you organize protests to merge with them, that means you are essentially organizing something under a different name, fair enough, but something that will basically add fuel to the fire. So are they adding fuel to the fire? Are they instigating or assisting the riots? And is that a political move? Well, again, it's different names, different organizations, but so in principle, in other words, like in terms of the words, no. But in terms of practice, in terms of what it means on the ground, yes. So that's also going to be a big argument coming up this weekend. On this point also, Donald Trump issued another statement on how the riots should be handled. And Trump said on Truth Social, quote, "If they spit, we will hit." And Trump said this is a statement from the President of the United States concerning the catastrophic Gavin Newsom-inspired riots, Trump's words, not mine, going on in Los Angeles. And he said, quote, "The insurrectionists," as he says, and remember, Trump is using very important legal language when he says insurrectionists, because if there's an insurrection, he can legally deploy the military. By calling it an insurrection, Donald Trump is using legal language that can justify the use of the military. And so when Trump says this, the insurrectionists have a tendency to spit in the face of the National Guardsmen/women and others. See, he's being nice, men and women and others. I think he's referring to like police though. But he says these patriots are told to accept this. It's just the way life runs. But he says, but not in the Trump administration, meaning he's not going to tolerate it. He says, if they spit, we will hit. And he says, and I promise you, they will be hit harder than they have ever been hit before. Such disrespect will not be tolerated. Now, in terms of law enforcement, if an individual spits on a police officer, it can be interpreted as assault on a police officer. In other words, they can file the charges. The DAs, they might not uphold it. A lot of times when it comes to that, it's going to be up to the DA. Some will not uphold it, some will, right? But Trump is saying at the very least they're going to charge people with it. They are going to move forward by filing charges. And of course, he's also saying that they will hit, meaning if you spit on the police or the National Guard, maybe they're going to hit you with that old billy club or maybe a nice rubber bullet. We'll see. Now, on that point, there's also a dispute over who is instigating the riots in Los Angeles. Local officials, including Governor Gavin Newsom, the Los Angeles mayor, again, they're blaming Trump for inflaming the situation by deploying the National Guard and by enforcing the laws that they don't want enforced, like the deportations. On the other side, Donald Trump is accusing local officials of inflaming the situation, and he's saying they have been encouraging the protests, and they're also not taking strong enough actions to stop them. That that narrative is going to be even more inflamed this weekend when the Democrat grassroots, 190 organizations, organizes nationwide protests, which will feed into this as well. This narrative is going to be expanded. Now, it seems also that Trump's position is becoming the narrative of other government agencies, though. And so this is important because while you see these things going national, while you see them trying to organize and turn this into a national movement, which is what you're seeing happen politically right now. Because remember, the grassroots, for the Democrat Party, the grassroots is their political movement, right? Trump has MAGA, that's his movement. For Democrats, it's the grassroots. They need these grassroots movements politically. That is their bread and butter, right? What you're seeing is that Trump is saying he will meet them at the same intensity. If they, up the ante, if they make this a nationwide thing, if they increase their, if they turn from peaceful protests or mostly peaceful, which means that some people are peaceful, some are not, right? It's kind of it's a bit of an admission that there is some violence, mostly, meaning some is not. That means he's going to meet them where they're at. And so you're going to watch them take a much stronger stance too. The entire administration is supporting this narrative. In an official post, the Department of Homeland Security wrote this. They say, quote, the riot in Los Angeles, they say, is the natural consequence of politicians vilifying our ICE law enforcement, comparing them to the Nazi Gestapo, igniting these riots. What does it mean if you are a government official and you ignite riots? What is another word for igniting a riot? Instigating a riot. What is the criminal charge of instigating a riot? Right? It's a crime. And so they are using, remember, it's important, they are using legal language. And especially as you watch 190 Democrat grassroots organizations they are planning peaceful protests. They're even training for the peaceful side of it. If that turns into a riot, will that also be igniting riots? Things are going to get interesting this weekend, folks. But Department of Homeland Security also says this. They say, under the leadership of POTUS, Trump, President of the United States, we will put the safety of American citizens first, not these criminal, illegal aliens and sanctuary city politicians are defending. That sanctuary city politicians are defending. In other words, remember, if you get down to the very grassroots of this whole thing, what is really going on? ICE agents, Immigration Customs Enforcement, they are trying to arrest and deport illegal immigrants. Protesters, many of them with non-governmental organizations or unions or other activist groups, are blocking them. Police are not allowed, and even attacking ICE agents. Because of local law, because of the politicians, police are not allowed to help ICE. They're being restricted from doing that, and they get attacked if they do it. And so, unless they change this, unless there's National Guard defending ICE agents, frankly, what's happening now, basically, unless the military is helping with the deportations, or unless they repeal, unless they get rid of the sanctuary city laws, the deportations can't happen. That's what's happening, right? If you get down to the basic argument right now, that is the argument. And who's in the wrong by it, right? Is it the federal government for trying to arrest illegal immigrants that's at fault? Or is it the local governments who are allowing these operations to be blocked and creating laws that protect the illegal immigrants from that? Remember, the laws are protecting the individuals when they go and block ICE. And is that obstruction? Right? Can that be interpreted as obstruction of justice or interfering with an official proceeding? Maybe they'll pull that one out. And now look, again, right now we're mainly watching the protests and riots in Los Angeles. There are smaller ones starting up in other places. LA is the main one still. Again, I mentioned Dallas, small ones in San Francisco, some in New York. Most of it is happening in LA still. As we get closer to Saturday, the June 14th riots, or not yet, let's call them protests for now, we'll of course see what the scale is. It's to be expected that some of them are going to have a lot more people than others. I understand that in some areas, again, like just in Los Angeles, they're planning more than 24 protests. Some of these are very small. You're going to be watching maybe a couple people. Some of them are going to be very large. And so it'll be different area to area. We're going to have to wait and see whether they stay peaceful or if they also ignite into riots similar to what we're seeing in Los Angeles. Again, also alongside all of this, we're going to have to wait and see. If this does happen, will the Trump administration also respond to those incidents in a similar way to Los Angeles? In other words, when it comes to Gavin Newsom's narrative that by trying to repeal the deployment of the National Guard, remember Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, his argument is this is not just a California issue. This is a national issue. If Donald Trump can bypass the governor and deploy the National Guard, which is being done now as a way to also support ICE as they deport people, he can do it anywhere. And so if it can happen in California, it can happen anywhere. And the question now is, as they are expanding these protests everywhere, will Trump also deploy the National Guard everywhere? This is going to be the big question. This is what we're leading up to coming this weekend. This is what's going to be happening, folks, so get ready for it. Regardless of what happens, regardless of where things go, we can expect some of these political disputes we're seeing, a lot of them are going to have to go to the Supreme Court. These political disputes will not be settled between Trump and Newsom. They're not going to be settled in the, even in like the circuit courts. This is going to happen in the Supreme Court, especially with California. And what's going to happen also, this is going to force a determination on whether sanctuary city laws are legal or not. And this could also determine how broad the deportation efforts are going to be going forward, because this could represent also a green light for Trump to use the military. The National Guard is the military, but even the Marines are now deployed. Use the military to aid ICE and aid the deportation efforts. And even in Los Angeles, where you have these riots taking place, ICE, as this is going on, is still conducting deportation rates. So all of this is still going on. Get ready for it. This weekend is Saturday is going to be interesting. It's all going to start Saturday and probably Friday night, I would imagine. So get ready for it, folks. That said, hit the like button. If you have a comment, question, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. Also, look, if you're on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to Crossroads. I do this show 4 days a week. I also do on Fridays. I'm working on investigations, features. I do a lot of on-the-ground reporting. Again, I've been in LA with the riots. I'll probably be going. I'll be going checking it out again later today. And so I do a lot of content like this Monday through Thursday. We also do the news show and live Q&A. So we'll jump into some questions. Ann F., you're saying Trump calls for no masks, but the leaders are passing them out in LA. Yeah, I saw that. So there was a video going around. There was a guy in a pickup truck. He pulls up and he's handing out, they call them bionic face masks. What are those? I was reading into it. It's basically, I don't know if it's for, I don't think it's for welders. It's like, it's a full covering face mask for like, I don't know, some kind of trade job. I don't know which one, technically. But they're full covered face masks. They have, again, like plastic in the front. They're not going to stop a bullet, you know what I mean? They're not like bulletproof things. But if you're getting, for example, getting hit with a rubber bullet, I don't know if these will stop a rubber bullet. I don't know if they're made that well. I would assume no. But they might be able to protect you from getting maced, right? If they mace you, if they're deploying the tear gas, these don't have breathers on them. So look, this is not going to stop people from inhaling the gas. It might stop some of it from getting in people's eyes. So, that's what's happening. There was a video of a guy pulls up in a pickup truck and the thing's just loaded with boxes of these, and he's handing them out for free to all the protesters. Now, a lot of people have said, okay, who is handing out bionic face masks? Because, it sounds expensive. They're not that expensive. If you go on Amazon, they're like $30. And so, look, I know for a fact you have a lot of grassroots organizations. The protests here, I shouldn't call them grassroots organizations. You have NGOs and nonprofit organizations, some of which get government money, all right? Some of which get government money active in these efforts. That is unquestionable. That is an undeniable fact. This is not purely just random people deciding to protest. There are organizers, there are organizations, there are nonprofits, there are unions. These groups are active. But there's also just a lot of random protesters as well. And if you have a random protester or some random guy who decides to go cash in $1,000 and buy as many $30 face masks as he can and loads them up in the back of a car, you could buy a lot of $30 face masks with $1,000, or maybe, even like $500. If they're $30, you could probably fill up the bed of a pickup truck with with $500 worth of them. So I don't think that's like it's a big deal. I don't think it's as big a deal as people are making it out to be, personally. But again, the optics are not good, right? Another question. Another point on this real quick, though, it also has to do with masks. So Trump is calling for people wearing masks to be arrested. Again, because of COVID-19, it has become culturally acceptable for people to wear masks during protests. And also in terms of laws, that was required during COVID. And so when you had the George Floyd protests and riots, the people were required by law to wear face masks. That created some real big problems because under American law, if you wear a face mask during a riot, you are committing a very serious crime. You are committing an additional crime, and one that you could face some pretty serious repercussions for. The issue is, again, it's local law versus federal law, because if a state or even a city has a mask mandate still in place or legally allows face masks, and I don't know if that's still in place in Los Angeles, but in New York, that has been repealed because you had so many people wearing face masks and just like robbing stores and stuff. It's going to be another issue where local law conflicts with federal law. Trump is now calling for people wearing masks to be arrested. The bionic masks are clear masks. You can still see a person's face, but they probably still could debatably violate federal law. They might file charges for it. They might not be upheld by the DAs. That's kind of the way it's going to happen. Now, real quick on that, we'll jump into another question. The big question, I would say, is if Donald Trump believes, as he's deploying the Marine Corps now, if Donald Trump believes the local state government and the local officials have become activists, and because of their political statements are not capable of carrying out the duties of justice, there's a possibility Trump could use a type of martial law, meaning any arrests would be handled through the military courts, court-martials. There is a chance that could happen. Crossing that line of martial law would normally be a big deal, but crossing the line of deploying the Marines and the National Guard is also a big deal. You could in some ways argue that Trump has already crossed. Maybe he's halfway across the Rubicon. You know what I mean? Maybe he's halfway across the Rubicon on that. I would say before you get to that point, he would have to make the determination that the local government is in political opposition to the federal government, and the local government is carrying out acts of obstructing justice. If he officially makes that determination, what will be the logical conclusion for it? Well, possibly arrest local government officials, which would possibly include some of the individuals like, in charge of carrying out justice. That would mean, by extension of that, he would have to use the courts through the military. He would have to use court martials, which means martial law. And if they do that, it's going to be a very, very different game when it comes to the face masks, when it comes to whether they uphold charges, when it comes to whether spitting on somebody's face could count as assault on an officer, or, if the military's there, assault on them. That's going to be the Rubicon. And we are very quickly nearing that. We're getting very close to that. Another question, Ashley from California is saying, when did protests get corporatized? Yeah, right. Yeah. Resist Incorporated, right? Resist trademark. What a time to be alive, right? Remember, we're the ones fighting against corporatism, but all of our funders are the biggest corporations in the country. Come out and resist. Brought to you by, and you have your corporate funders. People are joking. You can joke about it, but it's true. Now, look, you could argue. I found it interesting, and I did not include the quote because it's not true. It's a false statement. The upcoming weekend protests are brought to you by 190 organizations, many of which get corporate and government funding. Right? So look, if you have a protest, they're calling it a grassroots protest. They're calling it grassroots. Nationwide planned protests, 190 organizations involved publicly, not even including the ones involved that are just not putting literally not putting their logos on it, right? Like if this was a NASCAR race, you'd have 190 logos on this thing. They're calling it a grassroots protest organized by 190 organizations. Many of these organizations have government funding, state funding, and corporate funding. Many of those have government funding. So if you have a bunch of corporations and state funding and federal government funding going to organizations which have their logos on the branding of a protest and they're calling it grassroots, is that still a grassroots protest? Or is that a state-funded protest? Is that a federal-funded protest? Or is that a corporate-funded protest? And that could be a big deal, too, because that could actually go into one of the other big things we've been talking about a lot during the Biden administration, which is if the federal government or even a state government gives money to an organization which is carrying out actions that are politically motivated or have a partisan motivation or violate a civil rights thing or do something that goes against the Constitution. Remember, like the whole censorship establishment, where they were funding censorship organizations and they were censoring people doing things the government can't do under the Constitution. Does that violate, certain laws? And can that happen, actually? What we might watch is a review of federal funding to some of those organizations funding the NGOs and nonprofits and everything else which are behind this. It's going to get interesting. It's really going to get interesting. On a funny note, and this is me just laughing to myself, I don't know who came up with the name for the protests. They're called the 50-51 protests. Do you know why that's funny? Does anybody know what the police code 5150 is? Anybody in the chat? All right, you tell me. What is the police code for 5150? It's again they're 50-51, but what is 5150? It's if you're a criminal and you have a mental disorder. I got a kick out of that. It's if you're criminally insane, right? So they're basically calling this the protests of the criminally insane. I found that really funny. I don't think that was their intention, but it's funny. Now, look, I'm trying to try not to take sides here, but that was a bad choice of name. Whoever came up with that name made a very bad choice. The protest of the criminally insane. Bad idea. They should consider rebranding it. You guys got a few more days. Look, you have until Saturday to rebrand, okay? Consider this. Anyways, another question here. RealityIsReal.com, you're saying Trump is going against illegal criminals, no legal citizens of the United States. Yeah, well, and again, that goes back to what you have oftentimes is you have arguments built upon arguments built upon arguments, right? And this is the way a lot of things work. You have your initial argument, then you have the responses to that initial argument. And then there become political debates on the responses to the argument. So, when we're dealing with what we're currently watching, we have the surface arguments. Trump is deploying the National Guard. Is he responsible for fueling this? Trump is, again, arresting people. People are rioting against this. Who's to blame for the riots? Is it Trump or is it the local governments for not protecting ICE agents? Who do you blame, right? But if you boil it all down to the very, very bottom, the ground level argument is basically sanctuary city laws. Is Trump in the wrong for carrying out deportation efforts, or is the local government wrong for not defending ICE or for not arresting protesters when they block ICE? Again, if you boil it all down, that's the argument. And that's the one that needs to be determined. You see a lot of political issues like this. And a lot of people, what they do, there's the saying that you can lose the forest for the trees. You can get so caught up in what I call surface narratives that you forget what you're actually debating. Anybody who watches Crossroads, anybody who watches the way I do my investigations, I like to go after the foundations. I like to talk about what's really going on. When I was down in Panama and Mexico investigating, the whole migrant crisis, I wanted to get to the foundation. That's why I did that. I wanted to find out who's organizing it, why are they organizing it, what agreements or legal policies are in place to allow it, and that's why I reported the real thing behind the whole migrant crisis was that the United States had joined a United Nations program where we agreed and even funded operations to have mass migration into the United States. It was a government agreement internationally. It was the Global Compact for Migration. There was a few others. Why don't we talk about that? Why is that not the debate? Why was the debate over mass migration or illegal migration, whatever you want to call it, during the Biden administration, not focused on whether or not the United States should be a member of an international agreement where we agreed and funded operations to facilitate that? For me, that was the basic argument, that's what everybody should have been talking about. Why were we not talking about it? In fact, how many of you ever even heard the media mention that? Nobody was talking about it. You know what I mean? And why was that not the argument? I see it the same thing with these current protests. Again, there's the surface arguments. Trump deploying the National Guard, nationwide protests, all this stuff. If you want to boil it all down, what we should be debating, and this is the real debate, is it right for a state to allow people to block or attack ICE without the police intervening? Now, you could say that's a result of sanctuary city laws, but even below that, should police be allowed to defend ICE? Should police be required to arrest protesters when they are blocking the functions of federal law enforcement? Right? That is the real issue we're talking about. All the narratives aside, all the noise aside, that's what we're actually talking about. All right, everyone, it's getting a bit late, so I'm going to end it here. I'm still in California. I'm actually going to be speaking at Freedom Fest in Palm Springs in a couple days. So if anybody's going to be at Freedom Fest, it's a libertarian conference. I speak at a lot of conferences. You know, I'm not part of the Libertarian Party. I'm registered, non-politically affiliated. I speak at a lot of events. So I will be speaking at Freedom Fest in a couple days. Anybody who wants to come watch that, come to the event. So I will be there. Also, I'm going to go check out the LA riots yet again today. I'll give you a quick update on that as I drive up. But that said, let me know what you think, everybody. I want to know your thoughts. Let's have a fundamental debate. Do you think that the state government should be required to allow police to defend federal law enforcement if people are blocking them, obstructing them, and violating laws? Do you believe that should be allowed? Let's all have the real debate that should be the focus right now. What do you think? Let me know in the chat. That said, please hit the like button, share this episode, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We're trying to grow our YouTube channel again. So thank you all for being here. That said, I will see you all tomorrow. That said, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.